The date was the 12th of February 2012. 40,000 people crammed Gabon's Stade to witness that year's African Cup of Nations final. But it wasn't a simple final between two worthy African sides. No, it was the ultimate David versus Goliath clash. An immortal battle between Ivory Coast, golden generation of princes who were yet to be crowned as kings, and Zambia, a team who only had one player playing his trade in Europe. We all felt that the Ivorian superstars would have no trouble dispatching Zambia's Chipolopolos, but ultimately, that lopsided matchup went down in history as the crowning moment of the biggest underdog story in African football history. In this video, I'll show you how this team of nobodies did the impossible and how they mysteriously disappeared after. But before we start, if this isn't the first time watching Throne FC, please consider subscribing. With your help, we've already achieved 2,000 subscribers and now it's time to aim at 10k. Now without further ado, let's get right to it. For starters, let's talk about luck, which is probably what many of you think was the main culprit behind Zambia's success. That's fair of you to assume that, but the country where they would achieve their most outstanding feat was also the place of one of the biggest tragedies in Zambia's history. Almost 20 years prior, Zambia were living their most successful period and looked set to qualify to the 1994 World Cup. However, on their way to a qualifying match against Senegal, the team's plane crashed in the coast of Gabon and every single member of their squad unfortunately perished. Still, despite that grim reminder in the back of every Zambian player's head, the mood was actually quite good. Hervé Renard, the same guy who orchestrated Saudi Arabia's iconic win over Argentina a decade later, was back for his second spell as Zambia manager, and he promised to return the Chipolopolos to the heights that they almost reached if it wasn't for that fateful crash. Besides, Zambia had a solid run in the 2010 AFCON, leaving the players with a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could achieve something bigger than themselves. But before the ball started rolling, those were only dreams, unrealistic hopes that every player coming into such an important tournament always has despite his team's strength. However, those dreams were about to go through its litmus test. Zambia had Senegal waiting for them in the group stage first match, knowing damn well that a tough loss here could set the tone for the rest of the tournament. But you see, Senegal was actually the perfect opponent for Zambia. Hervé Renard knew their two most important players very well from his time coaching them in France. He knew Dembaba and Papi Cissé would relentlessly attack the Zambian defense, so he deployed a low block in that match, willingly inviting the Senegalese players to advance on the field, only to viciously hurt them with counter-attacks. And guess what? It worked. After only 20 minutes, Zambia was already winning by 2 goals, and although they would concede late in the second half, the underdogs were able to withstand Senegal's pressure and sealed a massive victory. 3 points were already in the bag, and the upcoming matches were considerably easier than the first. But then again, what looks good on paper might not be that appealing in reality. Libya showed a lot of grit, and Zambia were actually behind in the match in 2 different occasions. Ultimately, they salvaged the point, but after Senegal's surprise defeat against Equatorial Guinea, Zambia knew that they needed a win if they wanted to get first place in the group. Otherwise, they would most likely be paired with another African giant, just like they did 2 years ago, decreasing their odds of making it past the quarters. So when Zambia met Equatorial Guinea, they knew that they were in for a winner-takes-all match. Unless a disaster happened, no nation would miss the quarters, but potentially facing the Ivory Coast was something both nations desperately wanted to avoid, and in the end, Zambia were once again the team leaving the pitch with the biggest smiles. One day later, the inevitable was confirmed. Ivory Coast won their last match, finishing the group stage with 3 wins and 0 goals conceded. If there was a team to beat, it was definitely Drogba and his peers. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, the Ivory Coast ripped the Equatorial Guinea apart in the quarters. On the other hand, Zambia got paired with Sudan, a country that less than a year ago got divided in 2. Furthermore, they only made it to the knockouts due to goal difference, so for the first time in this edition, and in their most important match nonetheless, Zambia were the clear favorites, and they had 0 problems dealing with that pressure. Zambia won their match 3-0, the same result that the Ivory Coast applied to Equatorial Guinea, which led many to think how differently things could have went if it wasn't for that Christopher Katongo goal. Either way, it didn't really matter. Zambia might have made it to the semis, but they were about to face their biggest challenge yet. Ghana, with a team full of vibrant young players, almost shocked the world in 2010. The Black Stars were the darlings of the continent, as no African nation had come that close of making it to the World Cup semi-finals. So not only were they superior to almost every other nation, but they were also kinda playing at home in every match. It would take a huge amount of luck or a supernatural performance for Zambia to achieve the impossible, but it's like an old African hero once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. With the same counter-attacking strategy as the one used on their first group stage match, Zambia hoped and prayed for a miracle. And that miracle came in the form of a goalkeeper. Kennedy Mwine made save after save and kept Zambia in the game until with 12 minutes left to play, Emmanuel Mayuka took an inspired shot that looked guided by an angel. It went in, and just like that, Zambia toppled the second African giant on their way to the final. It was an iconic triumph and a feel-good moment that rewarded the Zambian players' trust in their coach's plan. Beating Ghana was a defining moment, but if you wanted to be a Debbie Downer, the Black Stars perhaps lacked the experience and calmness to put them away, and their win against the mighty Senegal got overshadowed by their subsequent 2 losses. And now they were about to face perhaps the greatest African squad ever assembled. A team of Premier League stars with the experience that Ghana lacked, plus the defensive stability that Senegal never showed. And for better or for worse, the Ivorians had the pressure of having to win something with their national team, after having failed to even make it out of the group stage in the last 2 World Cups. And so the Zambians went into the match with faith that all of the suffering, hardships and lack of praise that they had received would now be compensated, while the Ivorians, no matter how talented they were, never seemed to click with each other up until this point. Just by looking into the players' eyes, you'd be able to quickly grasp how immensely under pressure the Ivorians were. There were so many ghosts of disappointment from a not-so-decent pass, and the best way they found to deal with that was by attacking and trying to win the match early. But by doing so, the Ivorian game got slower as time went on, and Zambia simply stuck to their plan, to just hold on. The longer they stayed with the scores tied, the bigger their chance of winning the match, and although that chance never truly materialized in 120 minutes, surviving those 2 hours of action guaranteed them a fair shot at immortality. Fate would have it that this match would be decided on penalties, and from this moment on, it was anyone's game. Sure, the Ivory Coast had much more experience in decisive moments than Zambia, but on the flip side, the pressure was completely on the Ivorian side. Drogba had already missed a penalty that day, and he and his teammates knew that this could very well be their last shot of achieving something remarkable for their country. While the Chipolopolos were just singing, fully in the moment, hoping for a big victory, but at the same time knowing that this was it. This was probably as big as it could get. It took 18 penalties to decide the winner. Zambia were actually the first to miss, but the Ivory Coast couldn't capitalize, and after Gervinho failed to convert the Ivorians' 10th penalty in that match, all hell broke loose.
Champions against all odds, and amid what scenes of elation.
I'm a pretty rational person who only believes what he sees, but Zambia's campaign made me wonder if they somehow had divine protection. After all, it's somehow poetic how they could suffer their biggest tragedy and live their most glorious moment in the same country. But in reality, most of their success should be attributed to Hervé Renard. He was the one who knew how to play around his team's weaknesses, and while doing so, created a strong bond between the players who all shared the same will to win. I'm sure you think that's impressive, but at the same time, do you remember seeing Zambia in any World Cup after this? Probably not, right? Well, the thing was, other than winning the competition, nothing really changed for Zambia and its players. With the exception of Mayuka, who got a move to Southampton, every other player continued their careers more or less in the same trajectory, and unfortunately for Zambia, so did its national team. In the next year, they would miss out on World Cup qualification despite a hopeful start, and the same thing would happen in the next 2 qualifying campaigns. Regarding the African Cup of Nations, they would fail to defend their title in 2013, and during the last 10 years, they have either failed to make it out of the group stage or missed the competition altogether. Still, to consider their last 10 years as a disappointment would be extremely unfair. Zambia had a once-in-a-lifetime win thanks to a solid game plan and a strong mentality instilled by their manager, but also due to a lucky combination of factors. With all of that in mind, I'm curious to watch Zambia's campaign in this year's African Cup of Nations. Could they once again channel that fighting spirit and upset a few giants, or will they continue on their current mediocre path? Make sure to leave a comment so we can start a discussion. Drop a like so that YouTube knows you want to watch more content like this, and subscribe to never miss the most interesting football discussions, stories, and top 10 lists. Thank you for watching until the end, I appreciate you, and I will see you soon.